Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to East Central Missouri and the world, and welcome to the James Strong Show podcast number 215. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for making us a part of your day. I appreciate it. This podcast was recorded on the morning of Saturday, April the 10th, from the James Strong Studio in western St. Charles County. Several weeks ago, I did a podcast on the strange case of Travis Walton, an alien abductee from the 70s, a big-time story. They made movies about it. And the Travis Walton case is thought to be, by many, made up and just fabricated. And the reason being is that Travis Walton has made millions of dollars off of his story. And his story is not a whole lot different from your standard UFO stories that have abduction stories that have gone on throughout history. But once upon a time, back in the early 1960s, the first documented true alien abduction story is the strange case of Betty and Barney Hill. And I'm going to go ahead and analyze and look at this case. And those of you that haven't heard of the Betty and Barney Hill abduction case, you'll want to listen to this. Even though those of you that have heard of it and know something about it, I'm going to introduce some very interesting facts during this podcast about the Betty and Barney Hill abduction case. And we'll also look at the skeptics' views and as to whether or not this is real. And like I did with the Travis Walton case, you can decide if this is the real deal, total fabrication, or something in between. So today's podcast is about the Betty and Barney Hill abduction case. Before we get to that, I did want to give you an update on the Jaguar Mark 7, 1951 Jaguar Mark 7 restoration project that we're undergoing. I've had lots of help from my brothers, my sons, my father, and I will tell you that we are about halfway done stripping the car down, because the car, as I mentioned before, has to be totally stripped down before we take it to the company that's going to help with the restoration, and they will sandblast the car, fix the rust with sheet metal installation, rebuild the motor, rebuild the transmission, seal it, prime it, and give it back to me. We then put it back together again. And then after that's done, we give it back to the company I'm working with, and they paint it, and then we drive it. So right now, we're about halfway done taking everything apart. And I will tell you that I have learned so much about this car. The way the Europeans, the way the Brits put together a car, I should say, back in 1951, is nothing like the cars are put together today. Everything is strange. Everything is done a little bit differently. However, everything is very finite, very exact, very, very doable. I'll just say that. If you've opened the hood on a car recently and you look at it, you'll think, oh my gosh, what the heck is this? What does that do? I have no idea. And you close the hood. This car is different. Everything that's on there, you kind of know what it does. And because it's compared to cars today, it's a very simple, very basic, very finite way of putting a car together. So it's been a lot of fun. We're about halfway there. I'm going to cross my fingers, and hopefully by maybe July, we'll be ready to give it to our partner at It's Alive Automotive and have him do his thing. So there's the update on the Jaguar restoration. Now back to the number one reason for the podcast, the Betty and Barney Hill alien abduction. Now, those of you who don't know, Betty and Barney Hill were an American couple who claimed they were abducted by extraterrestrials, and they lived in a rural portion of the state of New Hampshire. and this abduction took part between September 19th and September 20th, 1961. It was the first widely publicized report of an alien abduction in the United States. The incident became known as the Hill abduction or the Zeta Reticula incident because the couple stated that they had been kidnapped by aliens who claimed to be from the Zeta Reticuli system. Okay. Now, most of Betty Hill's notes, tapes, and other items about the abduction have been placed in permanent collection in the University of New Hampshire, her alma mater. In July 2011, the New Hampshire Division of Historical Resources marked the site of the alleged craft's first approach with a historical marker. My son and daughter-in-law have been there. A little bit about the Hills and what makes their case very, very interesting. The Hills lived in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Barney was employed by the United States Postal Service, and Betty was a social worker. They were active in their local Unitarian congregation. The Hills were also members of the NAACP and community leaders, and Barney sat on the local board of the United States Commission of Civil Rights. Here's the interesting part about the Hills. They were an interracial couple at the time when it was particularly uncommon in the United States to be an interracial couple. Barney was black. Betty was white. And the reason I bring that up is the last thing, in my opinion, that an interracial couple in the United States in 1961 would want to do is to call attention to themselves about something new and bizarre that had happened to them. However, they did just that. Now, after this abduction, they didn't know what had happened. But with the help of a psychiatrist, the couples eventually revealed a startling story. The Reader's Digest version is, gray beings with large eyes had walked them into a metallic disc as wide, Betty said, as her house was long. Once inside, the beings examined the couple and erased their memories. Now, this experience would kick off a UFO inquiry, part of the secret initiative Project Blue Book. And Project Blue Book, of course, investigated UFO sightings across the country. The incident would also become the first ever widely publicized alien abduction account and shape how stories like it were told and understood from then on. Now, the debate continues as to whether the husband and wife team were liars, fantasists, crackpots, or simply sleep-deprived people who later recovered seriously scrambled. Let me back up just a little bit. I did not give my sources for this this interview. My sources were The Guardian, Project Blue Book, NewHampshire.com, the Stanton Friedman Archives, the John G. Fuller Archives, Dr. Christian Bader, and History.com. There, I wanted to get that in because just to let you folks know I'm not making all this stuff up. Okay? Anyway, here is the story of Betty and Barney Hill. The Hills' road trip was a spontaneous, well-earned break that Barney decided the couple needed. Barney worked on the night shift in the post office, driving 60 miles each way to his job. Betty's job, handling state welfare cases, was no easier. The little free time this biracial couple had was devoted to their church and activities related to the civil rights movement. After 16 months of marriage, Betty and Barney Hill saw this trip through Montreal and Niagara Falls as their delayed honeymoon. They left so impulsively they had no time to go to the bank before it closed for the weekend. They left with less than $70 in their pocket, which actually in 1961 was a bit of money. Now, on the last night of their 3-day trip, the tired couple sipped coffee in a Vermont diner to recharge before driving back. Barney figured if they pushed through, they could beat the wind and rains from an approaching hurricane. They left the diner around 10 p.m., estimating they could reach their house in Portsmouth, New Hampshire between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. at the latest. As they drove, a strange light in the sky gave another reason to hurry. At first, it looked like a falling star, but grew larger and brighter with each mile. Barney, an avid plane watcher and World War II veteran, was sure they had nothing to worry about. It's just a satellite, he assured his wife. It probably went off course. The light seemed to move with the car as Betty steered down the curving mountain road. The light zigged and zagged, ducking past the moon and behind the trees and the ridged mountains, only to reappear moments later. Sometimes it seemed to move towards them in a game of cat and mouse. It had to be an illusion, they thought. Maybe the car's movement made it seem like the light, too, was moving. Curiosity overcame them, so the couple pulled over to the side of the road in one of the picnic turnouts to get a closer look. Through binoculars, Betty saw the white light was really an object spinning in the air. "Barney," she told her husband, "if you think that's a satellite or a star, you're completely ridiculous." He knew she was right. Now, Barney had an IQ of 140. Barney was also a pragmatic man who wouldn't give flying saucers a second thought. This was a memory of his niece, Kathleen Marden, in a later interview. The night was too quiet for a helicopter, a commercial plane, or even a military jet with a hotshot pilot. What was this light, and why was it toying with them? About 70 miles past the diner, the object hovered just above the treetops, approximately 100 feet above them. Barney abruptly stopped the car, keeping the engine running. He shoved a handgun he had hidden beneath the seat into his pocket and rushed into a dark field, leaving Betty in the car. What he saw was as big as a jet, but round and flat as a pancake. "My God, what is that thing?" he recalled, thinking. "This can't be real." Behind rows of windows, gray, uniformed beings seemed to look right at him, Barney recalled. He tried to lift his hand to his pistol, but somehow couldn't. A voice told him not to put down his binoculars. He had a startling thought. We're about to be captured. Yelling hysterically, he ran back to the car and drove down the road as Betty tracked the craft, craning her head outside the window. Without explanation, loud, rhythmic beeps sounded from the car's trunk. The couple felt instantly drowsy and lost consciousness. They came to about 2 hours later and 35 miles down the road. Arriving home at dawn, the Hills assert that they had some odd sensation and impulses they could not readily explain. Betty insisted their luggage be kept at the back door rather than in the main part of the house. Their watches would never work again. Barney said the leather strap for the binoculars was torn, although he could not recall tearing it. The toes of his best dress shoes were scraped. Barney said he was compelled to examine his genitals in the bathroom, though he found nothing unusual. They took long showers to remove possible contamination, and each drew a picture of what they had observed. Perplexed, the Hills say they tried to reconstruct the chronology of the events they witnessed in the UFO, and they drove home. But immediately after they heard the buzzing sounds, their memories became incomplete and fragmented. So they went to bed. After sleeping for a few hours, Betty awoke and placed the shoes and clothing she had worn during the drive into the closet, observing that the dress was torn at the hem, zipper, and lining. Later, she retrieved the item from her closet and noticed a pinkish powder on her dress. She hung the dress on her clothesline, and the pink powder blew away. But the dress was irreparably damaged. She threw it away, but then changed her mind and retrieved the dress and hung it in her closet. Over the years, 5 laboratories have conducted chemical and forensic analysis on the dress. There were shiny, concentric circles on the car's trunk that had not been there the previous day. Betty and Barney experimented with a compass, noting that when they moved close to the spots, the needle would whirl rapidly. But when they moved a few inches away from the shiny spots, it would drop down. Now, in the weeks and months afterwards, Betty, an avid reader, checked out books from the library discovering the civilian UFO group NICAP, NICAP was the precursor to MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network.